Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be part 2 of my EBITDA series, and this one is going to pertain specifically to the cannabis industry, but you can use your imagination and see how it might apply to other industries. And in many senses, it applies to many of the nascent, newer, innovative, cutting edge type industries. And by the way, that could be tires in the early 1900s, or that could be tech stocks as today, or in today's specific example, the cannabis industry. So let's get into this. Knowing of the EBITDA tetrad is a good starting point in understanding the role EBITDA has in the cannabis industry. Here are 4 ways that these companies cook the books via aggressive accounting. Provide operational results and future prospects in a way that's comparable over time and across the industry. By removing the following, they're able to get much more flattering results. EBITDA, I, that's the interest. Interest on debt and interest paid on sale leasebacks. The T is for taxes. They're more than okay with ignoring deferred tax liabilities or just normal taxes. The D is depreciation. All the CapEx that's non-accretive for so-called growth with none of the recognition of cost. And they can keep weed on the books that's deteriorating in quality. And then they can write that off. Of course, those are impairments, but those also get backed out of adjusted EBITDA, so still doesn't matter. And then A, amortization. Well, back in the day, and even to some extent today, they still do a lot of sale leasebacks, a lot of sale leasebacks once upon a time, and those are amortized. So those get tossed out too. It's ironic that people who ignored these very real costs, the interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, are now congratulating these companies for focusing on paying down or restructuring their debt, interest payments, and pulling back on their CapEx spending to right the ship. The same analysts who played pretend by ignoring these companies' omission of interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization are now celebrating the company's attentiveness towards interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Take sale leasebacks, for example. They were done by many desperate, illiquid, and cash-strapped companies. Nothing like compounding problems down the road and increasing their hurdle rate. But of course, management teams spun a different narrative as to why they were doing sale leasebacks. But that's what happens when you deal with disingenuous actors. I've always thought that investors and management teams were supposed to be on the same team. Yet, more often than not, it appears to be an adversarial relationship instead of a complementary and symbiotic relationship. I'm reminded of the phrase, treat them like mushrooms, keep them in the dark, and feed them shit. Giving adjusted EBITDA figures and refusing to break down costs or same-store sales seems to fall in line with such a motto. When these companies provide you an EBITDA figure, they're asking you to willfully ignore the usury interest rates on the company's outstanding debt. You'll ignore how they're accruing massive tax liabilities. You'll pay no mind to large depreciation expenses which are associated with them overpaying for assets. And you'll be more than happy to ignore how sale leasebacks and their associated interest expenses are burning a hole in the company's financials due to amortization seemingly not mattering. Now, you'd think that EBITDA was a little much, but no, why stop there? Let's throw in some adjustments too. All their sins are forgiven in the Church of Adjusted EBITDA, where the zealots know no bounds in their willingness to finagle with the truth. Earnings have become fungible. When indoctrinated in the Church of Adjusted EBITDA, there is no tolerance for depreciation in their catechisms and bylaws. It's not a thing in their observance, faith, devotion, adherence, and belief systems. These practitioners aren't concerned with intellectual integrity resulting in a comprehensive understanding, but one of a constrained narrative that's right at the exclusion of information, i.e., look how much money we made once you exclude all this information, like interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and so on. The evangelists and maximalists know no bounds in their accounting. And if that's not crazy enough, people compare one company's EBITDA to another company's EBITDA and pretend like that isn't a stupid thing to do. Humans have this weird tendency to measure a proxy or derivative in replacement of measuring the actual thing. If EBITDA is allegedly a gauge for cash flow, here's a crazy idea. Just measure cash flow. It's also interesting to see people talk about adjusted EBITDA and also be obsessed with 280E. The reason it's interesting is because 280E will at best minimally influence adjusted EBITDA. This is when you realize that these investors are involved in kayfabe. They know adjusted EBITDA is a fictional metric, but they have to use it because if they had higher standards, they couldn't justify their participation in this sector in large part to begin with. Therefore, they settle for the nonsense which is adjusted EBITDA in order to maintain their fantasy. The two most important financial measures, we'll get into that later, of this sector, revenue and EBITDA, are largely unaffected by 280E. What you come to realize is that EBITDA is a backwards rationalized metric. EBITDA is largely irrelevant at assessing the performance of a business, where its relevance lies in its ability to paint a pretty picture. Subterfuge. Even on an EBITDA basis, these companies can appear expensive, so people layer on their hopes and dreams for the future in some perfect best case scenario and then talk about how the companies are actually cheap relative to that. Yes, you heard that right. The stocks are trading cheap on a hopes and dreams basis. It's no wonder why these people have gotten wrecked in their so-called investments, which are really more speculations. EBITDA. What does revenue minus COGS minus OPEX plus interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization tell you about a company? What does COGS OPEX EBITDA tell you? Do you see how stupid that sounds? Earnings after revenue minus COGS minus OPEX plus interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. But that's essentially what EBITDA is. Now, in full disclosure, I can't help but think that something's wrong there, but nonetheless, it's close enough. It's directionally accurate. So don't miss the point by me potentially being technically wrong. The only reason EBITDA doesn't sound stupid, like this multiple syllable thing I've said, is because we have become complacent and habituated and desensitized to the phrase EBITDA. It is still largely irrelevant, mushmouth nonsense though, just like COGS EBITDA. Does EBITDA have its place? Sure. Do people use it in place of other metrics because they're ignorant, lazy, or complacent? Absolutely. For the most part, it sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook to me and rather unhelpful. A better phrase, to quote Charlie Munger, is bullshit earnings. Don't forget, my new acronym and the currently accepted acronym are the same. One's just top down and the other is bottom up. EBITDA equals total revenue minus COGS minus OPEX plus interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. Net income, profit, isn't flattering, or more often the case, non-existent, so we have to move up the income statement to EBIT. That's also known as operating profit. But that also isn't good enough, so we move up the income statement to EBITDA. But that still isn't good enough oftentimes. So now we're to the point of adjusted EBITDA. Geez, how far we've fallen. Or how high we've had to climb up the income statement to appear profitable. Don't forget that many of the experts in this field were referencing funded capacity once upon a time to value these companies. People will say whatever nonsense they can get away with. Most recently, certain companies are referencing their impressive free cash flow. But of course, they're quieter about how that's not factoring in the uncertain tax positions and tax liabilities they're accruing, which inflates their cash flow figures. Sure, they'll mention one of those things one place and then mention another thing another place, but they never adjust the free cash flow to say, well, this is what tax adjusted free cash flow would look like. Because it's funny, because you see a lot of analysts, at least the competent ones, so actually not a lot, but I see a lot of competent analysts because that's most of the analysts I pay much attention to, adjust the cash flows and or free cash flows for non-paid tax liabilities or deferred taxes, or them trying to fuck off the taxes somehow. And so tax adjusted free cash flow or tax adjusted cash flow. That's what the analysts are doing, but that's not how it's getting reported. So there's a disconnect. So why would you be reporting metrics and figures to people knowing that they're then just going to have to adjust those figures? Like, yet again, thought we were on the same team. Pro forma free cash flow is not the same as free cash flow, yet many pretend it is. People are quick to co-opt their speech and bastardize language when it suits them. Therefore, it shouldn't be any wonder that people leave out the adjective that's meant to modify the noun. You know, gross profit, operating profit, and net profit when describing profit. Nope. Now EBITDA is synonymous with profit. It's sick and twisted, but that's not all. Through this deterioration of speech, adjusted EBITDA has become synonymous with EBITDA. And by extension, adjusted EBITDA now equals profit. People are a glutton for punishment. You don't believe me about this bastardization of speech? Check this out from a popular figurehead in this space. And the link's in here if you want to actually go to the Twitter page, you can go to this article and then you can click the link right there that says check this below image out, and then you can go see the Twitter feed yourself. It's a simple tweet that shows the Tier 1 MSO's EV to EBITDA multiple. Pretty simple, right? Pretty cut and dry, right? Huh. Nope, not when it's not flattering. So this is the Dales report, and they said Tier 1 current EV to EBITDA multiples. And the one we'll be focusing on here is Curaleaf, and it says 20.5 times. Like, EV to EBITDA, this is the multiple. Trailing 12 months would be the implication, even though it's not there, so you could finagle about that. But so let's scroll down. Boris Jordan, now the CEO, is seemingly incapable of understanding the above. Or if you want to assume competency on his behalf, his willingness to distort reality knows no bounds. Below, you'll see he's saying that the 20.5 times EV to EBITDA figure is very inflated. All capitalized. Cura EV to EBITDA is very inflated in your tweet above. Current multiple is 12x, exclamation point. And then, I don't know, some shrug emoji, I think. All right. Now, anybody who's in this space at all recognizes that Canvestments is a respectable figurehead in this space, along with his analysis. And he says, I see 752.56 million fully diluted shares outstanding at $4.97 a share, which equals $3.74 billion market cap. Cash of 91.8 million against debt of 587.8 million, so net debt of 496 million, so EV equals 4.24 billion. If you include income tax payable as debt. Then 2023 adjusted EBITDA was 304.5 million, so EV to adjusted EBITDA equals 13.9x, 14.5 with tax payable. And then he goes on to say, my guess is he's using actual EBITDA, as in, when he says he is using actual EBITDA, he is talking about this post, the Dales report using actual EBITDA. You know, the thing that it says in the damn image, EBITDA, like What is there not actual EBITDA? Well, that's called adjusted EBITDA. So that would be called adjusted EBITDA. It's incredible. So my guess is he's using actual EBITDA and not adjusted. Remove 20 million in SBC and 46 million in add backs, and you get 238.8 million, which would be a 17.8 times EV to EBITDA, 18.6 times with income tax payable. Okay, so a few things we can gather here. Apparently, the initial post, according to Can Investments, is saying that Boris Jordan is too low and the Dales report is too high. But it sure as hell is not 12. And when this got posted, I think there's a date maybe somewhere. Yeah, so this would have been March 20th. I've saved it this long, of 2024. I went and just did some, well, I pulled up a few different sites that tell you the information immediately, and they were giving around that higher teen figure, and then I just did some quick math, and I was also getting a higher teen figure, and then when I did the adjusted EBITDA, well, sure enough, you get a lower to mid-teens figure. But nowhere did I don't know. That's just interesting. So here Boris is seemingly proves that the figure is very inflated by using adjusted EBITDA through his sleight of hand. Notice in this tweet he didn't say that the EV to adjusted EBITDA was 12 times, but that the EV to EBITDA was 12 times, as though adjusted and non-adjusted figures are interchangeable. This is but one section of one thread, and to think there are thousands of similar comments made like this. The founder and chairman himself sees EBITDA and then immediately converts it over to adjusted EBITDA. And he acts as though that's even remotely okay. He acts as though using phrases and terms interchangeably is okay. It's just an extra letter A or an extra word adjusted. Well, in this specific example, the letter A makes a $66 million difference. Like I said, the line of what's real and not has been so blurred, corrupted, warped, and malformed that the practitioners of it have dug themselves a hole that they can't get out of. Just read the comments to see the confusion sown. Here are a couple of examples, or just one example. So I had a couple of examples, but yet again, going from Google Docs to this, to that, to Substack, now all the images get transferred. This hasn't happened for a while, so my apologies, but I just thought I'd let you know, because there actually was a couple of comments I had. So, with all due respect, guys, Boris Jordan corrected you and you responded by amending your 20x number to 12x. Is his number more in line with accuracy, or are you firm on the number you've posted? Thank you. Great podcast. I'll listen to you three and your guests regularly. All right, so that's a person who needs to consign his investing decisions and analysts to others. Because he should know, just by doing some quick math, okay, either I'm bad at math or somebody is wrong, and then you find out who's wrong the most. And I don't, very interesting. And I don't recall Boris Jordan actually addressing Can Investments comments either in that tweet. To see such non-starter issues become so heavily debated and causing such confusion reminds me of this quote by some German historian and philosopher. This constant lying is not aimed at making the people believe a lie, but at ensuring that no one believes anything anymore. A people that can no longer distinguish between truth and lies cannot distinguish between right and wrong. And such a people, deprived of the power to think and judge, is, without knowing and willing it, completely subjected to the rule of lies. With such a people, you can do whatever you want. Adjusted EBITDA. Integrative costs is backed out of a lot of adjusted EBITDA figures. They're essentially saying, hey guys, we're just going to go ahead and back out the costs associated with our primary business plans since it's a one-off. Then, when they shutter a store, cease operations in a state, or write down an impaired asset, they back those numbers out too. Why? Because it's a one-off. My God. Talk about self-dealing. Then you have TrueLeaf backing out legislative campaign contributions in their adjusted EBITDA figure. Yet again, that's the cost of doing business. Bribing officials, paying lobbyists, is part of doing business. And guess what? So are the associated legal fees of doing such things. If it wasn't a necessary part of them doing business, then I'd hope they wouldn't be doing it in the first place. They're a business, not a charity. Oh, and by the way, since cannabis companies suffer under the 280E law, they can't deduct charitable contributions either. It doesn't matter whether bribing should have to happen or not. It is what it is. It's part of doing business because otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. It's been deemed a necessary evil of the business landscape. It's the praxeological description of the landscape of humans doing business since time immemorial. That makes bribes a business expense and thus should be accounted for in their reported financial figures. Look, people, this is elementary thinking. It's not like I'm overreaching here to make superfluous associations. It's a business expense. How could it be otherwise? Oh, let me guess. It's because each campaign contribution is a one-off? Well, guess what? This so-called one-off has now become a more than $50 million expense. And let me interject here. If you've seen the most stupid posting, or a more recent stupid posting by Ron DeSantis about how he's against Amendment 3 because, because he doesn't want to allow TrueLeaf to maintain or gain a monopoly power. He pretty much called TrueLeaf a monopoly, even though TrueLeaf has 20% of sales in Florida. Now, yet again, definitions. He's using the word monopoly that's in a way that's factually false but sentimentally true to imply a sentiment, and people are dumb enough or pathologized enough in their ideology that they're more than happy to let it slide. So, but in that posting that Ron DeSantis made about TrueLeaf being a monopoly, he made the reference to a $70 million figure. So I guess TrueLeaf might be up to $70 million instead of the $50 million I've just read here. So let's move on. Sure, one day it might not be a necessity of doing business, but it currently is and has been for some time. This is an iterative pattern of behavior. It becomes a set and series of sequential contributions that's taken place iteratively over time. Let me ask you this. At what point do these bribes, lobbying fees, matter? At this point, it's a standardized business expense. How much would they have to spend for you to want them to include it in their reporting figures? How much? 100 million? 500 million? And is that per quarter? Anything less they can brush under the rug, known as adjusted? And why does it have to become a certain amount before you reconsider it being classified as a one-off? That's not how that works. Just because you think that if it's a negligible figure or small dollar figure in any specific accounting period, then it's okay to call it a one-off. But if it was a substantial dollar figure and amount, then it wouldn't be okay to call it a one-off. Well, that's not how that works. A one-off is measured based on its intrinsic one-off nature, not how much that one-off was. Compensation structure. Do you remember earlier when I said that revenue and EBITDA were the most important financial measurements? There was a reason for that. The funniest thing about this is the compensation structure. These people have gaslighted the investor community so hard that they let this happen. So much for kayfabe, this is now real life. The below image is from Green Thumb. Most important financial measures used to determine compensation for 2022. Oh, I know, outdated. Good. I mean, if you really want to knock me on that, go ahead. For those who don't, let's move on. So, most important financial measures used to determine compensation for 2022. This is hilarious. Below is an unranked list of the most important financial performance measures the company used to link compensation actual paid to the NEOs for the year end. An unranked list. It's 2 items. It's like, oh, no, I was, okay. So adjusted operating EBITDA. Like, I don't, like, that's an interesting phrase. Adjusted operating, like you got adjusted EBITDA, but then what's adjusted operating EBITDA? And then, anyway, so revenue and we'll just call it EBITDA for short, or adjusted EBITDA. So, revenue and adjusted EBITDA has pathologized the culture so badly that C-suites are being incentivized and compensated on it. If you don't see how this can create a principal-agent problem due to the perverse incentives and associated moral hazards, then I suspect you haven't listened to this point, nor have you been paying attention over the last half-decade, nor have you read or listened to any of my prior pieces. In the below image, you'll note that their adjustments led to an increase of earnings of nearly $93.75 million. What better way to boost your EBITDA by 43% than to adjust it? As though EBITDA isn't an adjustment in and of itself. Boris Jordan demonstrated this earlier. You went from E, that's earnings, net income, to EBIT, that's earnings before interest and taxes, also known as operating profit, to EBITDA, and now to adjusted EBITDA, which is really to say our adjusted earnings. So green thumbs, adjusted earnings were $311 million. But no one says it that way because no one would tolerate that. EBITDA, you have this nestling doll phenomenon where all these adjustments are simultaneously stacked and compartmentalized and compacted into one placeholder phrase known as adjusted. But EBITDA is already adjusted because remember you were adjusting net income and then you adjusted and then you adjusted and then you adjusted and then each little thing in, I think I might have covered this, either I'm getting ready to cover this or I covered it in the last piece, part 1. Like adjusted EBITDA isn't just an adjustment to the EBITDA figure. It's numerous adjustments, write-offs, impairments, inventory write-downs, stock-based compensation, on and on it goes. So adjusted EBITDA is numerous adjustments. So you could have like adjusted EBITDA. Think about that, people. EBITDA doesn't seem aggressive enough. How else could they grow EBITDA by 43%? And they figured it out. They'll pretend like impairments, write-offs, stock-based compensation, acquisitions, and transactions aren't real. And then we'll call that figure something similar to EBITDA. Oh, I got it. We'll call it adjusted EBITDA. So in this case, let me see. They made all those adjustments out of it. So EBITDA is 4 adjustments to net income. You removed amortization, you removed depreciation, you removed interest, you removed taxes. So that's 4 adjustments to net income. And then impairments, then write-offs, then stock-based compensation, then acquisitions, and then transactions. So that's 9. I think that's 9 adjustments. Each one of those is an adjustment. Let's not forget that. In conclusion, my point here today is simple. EBITDA is a subpar and suboptimal metric, and that holds especially true in the cannabis industry where the usury interest rates and effective tax rates make it a useless metric for all intents and purposes. From an investor standpoint, it has tons of utility and usefulness from other people's standpoint. The only utility it provides is for those who want to play pretend and live in a fantasy land by having their beliefs and feelings validated, or by those who want to take advantage of those who are engaged in cope and fallacy. Either way, it's not good. Although this article was in regards to the cannabis industry, it's also quite applicable in other markets and especially nascent markets. Take, for instance, online gambling. Look at the below disingenuous slide of speech. Boris would be proud. In the below example, seemingly operating cash flows and adjusted EBITDA are one and the same. LOL. After all, one is a proxy for the other. At least that's the oversimplified, decontextualized lie that's been firehosed and repeated to the point of ad nauseum. Look at this cute little post. DraftKings operating cash flows in Q1's 2024. 151 million adjusted EBITDA. It's like, what? So shouldn't that initial sentence say DraftKings adjusted EBITDA in Q1's? Right? Now this is interesting. So here's a link to the original. And below is a person bringing attention to this. Sam, if you don't mind me asking, how did you determine DraftKings achieved positive cash flow in Q1? Based on the company cash flow statement, that is not possible. You cannot include customer deposits on hand. And then he, just shows all this. Not really. I mean, you can look at it or go click on the link. Of course, Sam never replied to that question because the facts aren't on his side. He's calling operating cash flows adjusted EBITDA and moving on, and I don't know. I mean, who knows what his intentions are? But nonetheless, it's everywhere. Not everywhere, but enough places that to say oversimplification and exaggeration like everywhere in a hyperbolic fashion might be necessary to guard yourself against it, to just anticipate it anywhere you turn in the investing community. The sickness of mind and commitment to pathology required to conduct one's character in this fashion is something that I have practically zero interest in. Distorting reality, step by step, through creeping normalism and shifting baselines is a positive reinforcement cycle and has a gravity to it. A slippery slope, each time you do it, is easier and and the more complacent and compliant you become in ratcheting it up. Where you end will look nothing like where you started, and it'll be for the worse. Or the better, if you're making a living by being a hired gun analyst with minimal integrity, willing to paint over reality to superimpose your own fantasy. Then this can really work for you, I suppose. Your speech is the guiding and orientating mechanism that you use in the world to be able to define and identify reality in order to navigate it. As such, it's your first and last resort in not falling into catastrophe. The problem is that the one thing which you'll need to keep you out of catastrophe and or once you find yourself in catastrophe will no longer be there for you, i.e. your honest speech. Because then you can see, oh no, I'm in catastrophe, what happened? Let me evaluate the playing field and see how I can get out of it. Well, that would take honest speech. But many people are, for instance, pathologized and ideologically bigoted. So they won't be honest. For instance, they'll be in catastrophe and then they'll say, I'm a victim. I'm here because of the oppressive patriarchy. It's like, well, maybe it's the 1,000 mistakes you've made up to this point. Maybe it's all the poor decisions you've made up to this point that's compounded and led to emergent properties and there's a phrase I really like. And can't think of it at the moment. So maybe you made a bunch of errors. And as a consequence, like maybe you bought with FOMO. But if you say, hey, I got tricked, that's why I lost all my money, I'm not going to involve myself in stocks anymore, then you've now eliminated a way to get back out of the hole you dug. As opposed to saying, I had FOMO and I was ignorant, therefore I could manage my emotions better and become more educated and get out of this hole. But that's not what people do. They just stay in the hole. And that requires honest speech. When you're in a hole, you need to evaluate, how did I get in the hole? And then, as such, subsequently, how do I get out of the hole? And you need your honest speech. So they've compromised the one thing that will get them out of that predicament that got them also in the predicament. So the thing that got them in predicament, which is lying, deceit of themselves, was due to them compromising their honesty. So then when they're in the consequence phase, And the result of that, the thing that they need to get out of it and to better themselves, they've compromised and foregone, i.e. their honest speech. So it was the absence of honest speech that got them in the predicament, and it's the absence of honest speech that will keep them in the predicament, or at least keep them in the predicament much longer than they alternatively could have been. And as far as I'm concerned, EBITDA, in large part, is symptomatic of this compromise of speech. So, yes, it's not just a matter of principle or practice, but of the highest existential concern to me. EBITDA is a behavioral manifestation and symptom of a deteriorating, atrophied, and apathetic mind. And as I said, I want no part in that. If you like what you heard here today, or if it at least made you curious, go ahead and you can either read or watch part 1 of this, and you can click the link there, or go and look it up on my channel. Thank you for watching, and until next time.